Hello, it's April 1st, 2026, and this is my live weekly update. I wasn't going to do an update this week because I've been kind of behind and things have been, time's been playing tricks on me. So, yeah, I feel like I'm stuck and trying to catch up and everything's happening all at once. So, I wasn't going to do an update today, but then I started thinking about it and I was like, well, honestly, a lot happened. And I specifically am intending to use this update to talk about vulnerability and my process of what it looks like to become a meta-philosophical performance artist. I mean, I say I want to be a meta-philosophical performance artist. I say that's what I'm doing all of the time. And some things happened this week that made me really think about what that looks like, what that requires. And I wanted to challenge myself to talk about it. Part of the process for me has been like in the past couple I'm going to tell some stories. I'm going to tell some stories today about the past several weeks and specifically about a few things that happened this week related to vulnerability in particular and my process. But part of why I decided to do an update is that I came to this like reminder. I'm not going to say I fully internalized it. I didn't learn it enough that it's like in my bones yet, but I have an understanding that really the most free people, the people who are the most liberated, the artists who are creating like the most boldly, even the people, the leaders, the people we want to be like, learning from and following, they're not saying things like, let me tell you everything that I'm doing. Sometimes, and clearly this is something I struggle with, over explaining and like saying so much to bring people along to be intelligible to others is, I think, like, I don't know, a defensive mechanism or it's a form of protection. We could be generous and say, yeah, we're just trying to bring people along so that we can like facilitate greater shared understanding. And to a degree, that's true. But I've noticed in myself where and when I have a tendency to over-explain because I don't want to be misunderstood or I don't want to be, like confusing to people. So, for better or worse, sometimes it's definitely for worse when it comes to a creative process. And then I thought, well, if there's actually a time to explain what I'm doing, it would be during these live updates because I'm realized that I'm creating these kind of like a scaffolding for how to share out what I'm doing. And on some layers of that scaffolding, I want to be as free as possible where I don't have to second guess or doubt or interpret or over explain and I just can put it out there. That would be me like fully living as artistically and freely as possible and sharing from that place. And because I'm not strictly just an artist, but a philosopher, and my large hope and intention is to like help people learn in their process too. I realize that there's still something significant about sharing from a more personal perspective, and there is value, I think, in hearing people talk about their own process to be able to learn like what's going on behind the scenes. It's like the director's cut of a film, or just like being able to get into the head of your favorite artist. Like I wish I could. I love that. So this specific channel of sharing the live weekly update, I thought, is precisely the place where I should be explaining myself because I'm not really doing a performance here. It is still meta, naturally, but it's not a performance and I don't have to be an artist right now. So I want to talk about what's been going on, and I have a feeling this is going to be I have a feeling this is going to be the most meta. If I do it well, this will be the most meta update yet. So here's what's going on. This hair though is really bothering me. Stay put. Okay. So what's going on with the meta philosophical performance art this week? Vulnerability and sharing my process. Again, I made the decision to share because I thought, really, this is like there was a critical turning point in the past week around my own relationship to vulnerability and understanding of it. And I've talked about vulnerability before, especially here, because I've shared how I frequently get feedback from people who are like, wow, you're so vulnerable. You really put yourself out there. This is because I create public spaces like of my own volition where I am inviting the public, strangers, people who I don't know, to come into a space that I have now designed and now will facilitate. And we're going to have an experience. And I usually share some stories about myself. And that's provocative to get people thinking and talking and connecting with each other. And in doing that, I think a lot of people generally feel like that's vulnerable because most people don't put themselves out there. Some people have a fear of public speaking. Some people feel exposed. Or I assume there's also this like layer of being like, what if people judge me? What if I don't do well? What if, like I make a poor impression? And all these other kinds of self conscious considerations, which I have those too. It's not that I don't. I just think that I've really been reflecting this week of how much I have been stepping into a place of even more wild experimentation, even more sort of unruly, no expectations, doing things that people, myself included, have not really done before, which is a very difficult realm to step into. Let me just name that. Like, for instance, I'm afraid of improv classes. I've never taken an improv class and I do not like improv. I was in theater in high school and I hated any kind of improv exercise we had to do. My brain has changed a lot. I think my attitude towards trying and listening and being present enough to engage is so different from when I was like 15. But the idea of improv still scares me. And yet, if you take an improv class, there's sort of like rules and expectations. People know what improv looks like. It's like, yes, and you listen, there's like an established understanding of even doing something new for you, like improv can have something that's like kind of pre-existent. But a lot of the stuff that I do, I've never done before. And I'm inviting strangers into spaces to do things that they've never done before. And so that's why I call it the radical first. It's like no one really knows what's going to happen or how this is going to go. And that to me does feel, I will agree, vulnerable in the sense that it's wildly underdetermined. And the margin for error seems wide. But that's the part that I've like really been leaning into, because I want to try. So it's not because I don't know what's going on or I don't have a plan or an idea or a purpose. I have a strategy, and sometimes I have to like remind myself of what the strategy really is so that I can stay on path, especially if I feel like I'm like, that was weird. What happened? And so that's what I'm kind of trying to do. So for today, I'm going to see if I can do this. My brain doesn't work in a linear fashion, so it's hard to kind of hit all the points. But I think I want to start with talking about where the meta-philosophical performance artist like idea came from, and then tie that into some other ideas like love and artist. I'll give a little history, little review of some things that I've done in my life. And then I'm going to talk about what happened around this week with vulnerability in particular, and how I've related that in with my own commitment and question of like, well, how do you become a meta-philosophical performance artist if you're really going to do it? And somewhere in the background, there's always the larger context and questions around like romancing the revolution, becoming more free, what does liberation look and feel like, and how that relates to the larger issues of the world. Trust me. I still sit with like, what good is it to share this process? But my hope is that like, I don't know, it's honest. And ultimately for me, it might look very different for you to try to get more free. For me, there's something that I am really focused on, which is like how to be more committed to doing the thing that I know I can do and want to do, but do it in a way that feels not like hung up and hindered and inhibited, but free. And that's something that I will like name. So I don't know, let's do a little body check right now, right? Like for me, how do I feel right now? I feel quite comfortable talking to a camera. I'm alone in my house, and this will go on the internet. Someone will see it. Maybe people will watch it. Presumably, if they do, there's like an interest and a want to do it. So that's lovely and nice. Thank you. But I'm not like in real time making eye contact with people who are just like glaring at me with a confused look, like, what the fuck are you doing? That's a different experience. That also happens sometimes, but it's not right now. And then there are other times when I'm like, when do I feel the most free? So I was gonna say, let's do a quick body check to see just right now. Me, I'm feeling okay. Not the freest I've ever been, but I'm not feeling super stressed. I always feel a little bit discombobulated when I do these lives because they're kind of like messy and loose and there's no real structure to it. So I'm just kind of free flowing, but like, the stakes feel pretty low on that. For you, I'm curious, like, do you know the times and places where you actually feel free? That to me is like the aspirational guide. Like, maybe we can move towards the places where we do feel that, the situations, context, the people with whom we can be the most like free, relaxed, at ease, open, present, authentic, vulnerable even. Like, but I also feel like there's something really about like telling the truth where there's kind of that flow state. We can just exist, but not exist in a way that stays stagnant, but we exist in a way that is like generative and creative. Um, to me, I often feel that way when I'm teaching. I feel that way sometimes when I'm speaking in front of groups, and I feel that way a lot of the time when I'm alone. Someone recently was like, "It's like being unmasked." If that's language that resonates with you, then yeah, when do we feel like we can be the most unmasked? And not just for our own sake of our own existence, but what can we do when we are in that space, that feeling? To me, I don't know, I'm jumping all over already because like there's something important about like acknowledging vulnerability, even with that, right? Does that make sense? Like when you're trying to be the freest or when you feel that authentically open and present and like uninhibited, I feel like maybe if we don't feel that, then we think about it in a way that triggers notions of vulnerability. Like, oh, well, if I were to really show up like that, then that's what makes me feel nervous or full of doubt or something like that. Anyway, you help me track the thread of vulnerability and where this all flows together. Anyway, I think that being in a space where we can feel that free is aspirational. And what can we do from that energy is the ultimate question. That's really the project that I'm trying to explore of like, if we can become the people who I think we need, doing what we know we can do that is ours to do, I think the highest mark of our progress and aspiration would be to do those things from a place, from the energy, from the embodied sense and the experience of true freedom, which feels to me like no fear, all power, and there's like really nothing holding back. I'm saying that because I wanted to feel that way this weekend. I had the first of the gadfly this year. And I was like, I can do this. I know I can do it. I just want to have fun with it. I want to be free. I want to like feel really relaxed and at ease. And that's the best way for me to show up. And I didn't feel that way at all, as it turned out. And I'm going to talk about that because I made a last minute decision to change course literally the night before. And it was like, I got to be really vulnerable here. And the whole reason why was because I had this thought to myself the night before. And I thought, if you really want to be a metaphilosophical performance artist, then you're going to have to do it differently. And the doing was around vulnerability. And so I showed up the next day and I was like, I've got to be vulnerable. And it did not feel good. And I don't think it went well because the vulnerability, yes, I leaned into that, but it wasn't from a place of like power, freedom, being fully at ease. And that's like my, okay, something to keep thinking about. Let me back up now. We're going to go way back into some history and context to make this as meta as possible. So, let me explain where the idea of becoming a metaphilosophical performance artist came from, or like kind of the earliest origin I can think of this. It was probably like 2015, 2016 when I started saying it. And I think I've mentioned this numerous times before in many places. The like way that this goes is that I told people I wanted to write a metafiction novel about an academically trained feminist philosopher who led gender equity efforts in higher education and then became an accidental stand-up comedian and got her own Netflix special entitled How Smoking Weed Changed My Life. And I'm not going to talk about how smoking weed changed my life right now, but the idea of writing a metafiction novel about an academically trained feminist philosopher becoming like into stand up was kind of like the overall arc. Now, in that was cute like 10 years ago. Now what I'm saying, is it me? Now what I'm saying is that you could say, you know, I want to be Cori, I want to be a metaphilosophical performance artist, which is very different from saying, I, Cori, want to write a metafiction novel about a character who does these things. Okay, so anyway, that's probably the earliest start of this like metaphilosophical performance artist thing. Then something interesting happened where I had this idea, and it was because of a friend. A friend back in like, I don't know, maybe 2020 was like, you should submit an application to this. The application was for like a writer's opportunity for emerging writers, and it was put on by Roxane Gay in honor of, I think, her brother. And they were soliciting applications for people who wanted to be a part of this like writing experience. Roxane Gay would mentor you, and you could be a part of her newsletter, The Audacity, and it would be this emerging writer series and all this awesome. So you have to put in your proposal for what you would want to write. Now, Roxane Gay does like critical nonfiction from a feminist, anti-racist lens. What I proposed was never going to be picked up by that, because it just didn't really accord with, you know, her whole like project and purpose and style and what they do over there, The Audacity. That's the name of her newsletter. But nevertheless, I still put forth the effort to put in an application, mostly just to think through the idea. So the idea that I proposed was that I wanted to have a newsletter, and it would be now a metafiction newsletter called Love, an Artist. Just like you would sign off on a letter, you know, like love, Cori, love, an artist. And so the newsletter, Love, an Artist, would actually be written in the voice of like a meta performance artist who was talking about each newsletter that would go out would be a description of one of their meta projects. So here's this project that I did, and it would kind of include the artist's statement, what the intention was, but because it had happened, then it would also be able to elaborate, like, here's people's reactions, this is what came out of it, this is what I learned. And so there's like more the artist perspective from beginning, middle, performance, and analysis share out. The newsletter, each newsletter would be, here's my performance piece and here's what happened to it. Love, an Artist. So I wanted to write that newsletter and thought about, I mean, I could have made up meta projects for this artist to have like performed and done and then reported out into their subscribers. But I was like, I actually could probably do that now because I've done so many projects that I could actually like say, oh, For the Love of Strangers, this is how it started, this is how it went, these were some interesting things that came through, here's what I'm thinking about it now. And then, of course, like, I mean, the meta part of it would be that as a newsletter, as a meta newsletter, now I'm, because of me and who I am, I'm tweaking this to be less meta fiction and more just to be like a meta project itself, a meta newsletter. Then it would also be, you could say, like a way of sharing with an audience about a process, and maybe that becomes its own meta project around like connecting with people or testing the limits of intimacy through artistic performance, even through writing. Sounding familiar? So I didn't get that newsletter opportunity through the Roxanne Gay's like fellowship that she was doing. But I think about that a lot of how there was a time when I was like, Love an Artist is going to be this meta newsletter that I want to write. I guess I was like curious about like flexing my fiction voice still and just like making it up so it wouldn't have to be real, but the overall project could be meta. So that would be my project. I hope that's making sense. And you follow all these levels because it can get confusing. Anyway, I never made the Love an Artist newsletter because I didn't get that opportunity with Roxanne Gay, and that's fine. What I did do, though, now is put on my website a section called Love an Artist, which is a little bit less meta and much more like direct and concrete. That's the page where you can like support my work if you want to. It's, word of mouth, donations. You can buy my cutie coloring book, whatever it is, but that's a way to show like love an artist. I also like the play on words naturally because of the way that I talk about love all the time as being the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's healing, transformation, and liberation, so that you can actually see that any project, any effort, whether it comes through as a newsletter, whether it comes through as an experience container, whether it is something that someone does and then shares, that will to extend oneself is also, in many ways, if done for the right reasons, in the purposeful energy, can be an act of love itself. So like all of our art, all of our projects can become meta in the way of being loving projects. We do it from a place of love, and that is an extension of our will. So, I mean, if anybody wants to keep count on the meta dimensions of this, good luck. So I have Love an Artist now as a page on my website. It's no longer my newsletter. What I did do is create a new Substack, Want to Know, where I've said I'm experimenting with establishing and developing like what it looks like to have an epistemology of intimacy, what it means to practice and understand that truth is a relationship. So anyway, hi, welcome. And now here I am on that platform, Substack, Want to Know, my actual newsletter, which I describe as some sort of meta philosophical project, doing these live weekly updates to share my process. So now we're going to get really, really, really into it. Okay. Because now we're getting into like the real life part of the meta philosophical performance art projects. So what I already said that like this past weekend before I was doing the Gadfly, I had the thought to myself where, it was like I could go and I just want to tell some stories. I want to do some public service announcements about things that we don't know. And that's like epistemological. I'm talking about truth. I want to talk about the Gadfly itself. And I had a really solid idea. But then it occurred to me that if I really wanted to do my work the way I say I want to do it, then I would have to be even more meta with it. And that's where the vulnerability piece kicked in. Why vulnerability? Well, this all stems from something I'm actually engaged in right now. Part of what I'm doing in the meantime is we are like smack in the middle of an 8-week program that I'm creating and designing and facilitating for some youth in town. This is for Black youth in Northern Colorado. And for several years now, I've worked with them every spring and kind of continued to create a new experience and a new kind of like program for them to learn through. We've moved through so many different topics in the past 4 years that this year we're preparing for them to like really step into their voices as artists, as performers, having a creative take on the world. And they're like old enough now to be like, someone should say something. And I want to be like, why don't you say something about that thing that's going on in the world or that's going on in your experience? So I'm trying to give them, a real solid foundation for how to, the phrasing of this program is make your voice matter, which is, again, a play on words, because it's not just make your voice be significant and impactful, but how to like make your voice matter in the world in the way of like have some being, have some materiality, make something with it, for it, of it, from it. So, in making your voice matter, um, of course, I want that to be grounded in a place of liberation. The project being like we know what we're saying and why we're saying it because we're rooted to a larger vision of the kind of world that we're trying to create. Especially even if you were going to critique what's wrong with the world, critique makes so much more sense when you know what would be right and how that would look otherwise. So when we started with like moving from a place of liberation and having this vision so that when your voice comes through, what you're speaking is actually anchored in a vision of liberation. We got to this point last week where I was like, well, how do you do that? Because what if we have internalized our own forms of oppressive beliefs that are actually keeping us small and holding us back? Sometimes, in order to move towards freedom, we have to get free ourselves. And that is itself a very vulnerable project because, I mean, we want to be free. If we aspire to be liberated, then to say that we're not is I don't know, that can be hard, that can be heavy, especially if you think that like we should already be there or something, or like I shouldn't be bothered by these things that weigh me down. So in this conversation last week with this handful of like middle school, high school students, I was saying I made a page, so I'm just going to show you. This is the page that I made for them, and here in this little part I was saying sometimes, even oftentimes, sharing your own process of how you are getting more free is valuable to share, and it can help others do the same if you are vulnerable enough to be honest. So, to show our own process of how we are getting free actually requires so much honesty to be able to name where we're not and where we're stuck. Or we have to be vulnerable enough to like recognize the pieces that need so much love and tender care and healing in order to be more free. So to prove this, like, or to demonstrate what that looks like, of like sometimes if you want to make your voice matter, even just sharing your own process of how you are working to get more free yourself can feel vulnerable if you're honest, but it can be so helpful and impactful for others. I had them read 2 paragraphs out of Audre Lorde's work. This one is from her essay Eye to Eye. And I'm going to read it because I think it's really powerful as like a kind of demonstration of what it looks like to name the process of trying to get free. And it's like classic Audre Lorde too. Okay, so she says, to search for power within myself means I must be willing to move through being afraid to whatever lies beyond. If I look at my most vulnerable places and acknowledge the pain I have felt, I can remove the source of that pain from my enemy's arsenals. My history cannot be used to feather my enemy's arrows then, and that lessens their power over me. Nothing I accept about myself can be used against me to diminish me. I am who I am, doing what I came to do, acting upon you like a drug or a chisel to remind you of your meanness as I discover you in myself. America's measurement of me has lain like a barrier across the realization of my own powers. It was a barrier which I had to examine and dismantle piece by painful piece in order to use my energies fully and creatively. It is easier to deal with the external manifestations of racism and sexism than it is to deal with the results of those distortions internalized within our consciousness of ourselves and one another. Okay, those are the 2 paragraphs. So a lot here, really, like searching for power within oneself requires dismantling the internalizations of the messages that we have actually held on to that have blocked us from having our power or being able to really fully creatively utilize our energies and even really fully be present as ourselves with each other and see each other in those ways. That's the reminding you of your meanness as I discover you and myself. But the key piece here that I think is so powerful is the recognition that if we have if we still have work to do that our enemies' arsenals can hold over us, or they can put the feather into their arrow and use it against us because we have not addressed the most vulnerable places or the sources of the pain that those can use over us to hold against us, then that will always be our weakness. And it's something that we've internalized that has kept us small and weak. So, I love, we could say this with this line too, that nothing I accept about myself can be used against me to diminish me, especially if we accept something about ourselves that other people have deemed not good. So whether that's from a racist perspective or a supremacist framework that they say, oh, that makes you less than, that makes you not good. If you can accept those things without saying, "Oh, that makes me not good." No, you accept like, "No, I am who I am, and it's not degraded in the way that you think it is." That way, whatever you think doesn't affect me. There's one of the students who described it as like being able to have a shield. Like you access your own power enough to now have like a kind of a buffer against those kinds of arrows being thrown at you because they just deflect off. They don't hit you, they don't sink into your body, and they don't feel that tender anymore because you're not so vulnerable to that. Okay, so I'm over explaining what Audre Lorde was talking about. The fascinating part about all of this, right, is that um, the point was to say we have to be able to do the most like painful process. She calls it like that incredibly painful process of going piece by piece and looking at those parts of ourselves, and that it's difficult work. And so I asked the students, I was like, what, you don't have to name this right now, but where are the vulnerable, tender places in you that others, whether they mean to or not, could use against you? Or you've just internalized that so much that it is used against you by yourself. Like you have actually internalized those distortions to keep your voice small or to tamp down your own sense of power. Um, so the irony of all of this was that I was, trying to give them examples of being like, here are things that uh, when you show your vulnerability for other people or you name, this is something that used to get me down, but now it doesn't anymore. And this is the process of how I got free from that. That can be really helpful for people. I gave an example of something someone told me once, which was that um, this was probably like 2020, 2021. I was doing a talk on like demystifying whiteness. And someone asked for an example, and I was like, yeah, here's an easy, quick one that I can give you. Like, my whole life, I struggled, my whole early life, I struggled with my body hair because I have really long, dark arm hair, and I got teased for it. People bullied me for it. And so through middle school and high school, like I did every possible kind of like hair management you could do. I burned the shit out of my skin. I plucked every single hair individually. I shaved. I did creams, like on and on and on. And it never felt good. And even when I would do those things, I would still get teased and bullied about it. So it wasn't until I started to actually understand mechanisms of like whiteness, even just in the form of like beauty standards, that I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Plenty of people around the world, especially people of color, uh, have body hair and it's dark. And so this was my own internalization because I was young. I didn't know. I like read the magazines and saw the commercials and people teased me for it. So I got to a place of being like, no, I have long dark arm hair and it doesn't bother me at all. So that apparently when I said that, there was a woman watching it and her daughter was listening too. And the mom came to me later on and was like, I have to let you know that when you named that, and it like changed my daughter's life because she heard you say that this was a thing that you realized and you got over it and now you embrace and accept it. And she needed that because she has dark arm hair. That's one of those examples of like when we show our process of how we got free, we can name the thing for other people, and that can be helpful itself if you are vulnerable enough to be honest. So then, with these students, literally last week, I caught myself in the moment saying, yeah, like I have other vulnerabilities and and then I couldn't say it. And I was like, wow, that's really messed up. That I'm like here trying to encourage you all to pay attention to the source of that pain and go to those most vulnerable places, like Audre Lorde's saying. And I was like dancing around it. I could do the arm hair example, but I couldn't actually name the vulnerability that was like the one that I know that holds me back the most. And so I was like, well, that's obvious. At least I called that out in front of them. I was like, and there you have it. I'm not even doing it right now for you, which is quite telling for me. And it really bothered me that I wasn't able to even do that with these students. And it wasn't anything like, terribly bad. It's not inappropriate for them to hear anything, but it was my own protection. Be like, I'm not ready to name that vulnerability yet in front of these young people. So that was on a Wednesday last week. I sat with it, sat with it, sat with it, sat with it. Saturday, a few days later, is when I had my if you want to be a metaphilosophical performance artist, then the way that you do this most powerfully in the opportunity you have right before you is to actually do the thing, be vulnerable, name it. So that was my last minute pivot going into the gadfly where I was like, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to have to be vulnerable and I'm going to have to say this thing and I'm going to do it differently. And it felt terrible, felt terrible, and it was awful. But in between all of that, something important happened. In between all of that, on Sunday morning, I had Romancing the Revolution, and one person was on the call. Other people didn't show up. But this one person, it was the last week of March, so, we'd gone through the month. And maybe it was because there was only one person on the call, but we had this phenomenal conversation. And that's exactly what Romancing the Revolution is for. It's not to just talk about the thing. It's kind of to dig in, to really learn and share with each other about the stuff that's meaty and, important. So we got there, just me and this one other person. And we were talking about vulnerability. We were talking about all these kinds of things, but it's kind of it takes a while to warm up, and then as soon as you're like, oh, we're out of time, but it was just getting good. We ended up going over time because I think that happened. And I was telling them this story of how I wasn't vulnerable and what I needed to do to be vulnerable. And so I actually told the person the most vulnerable thing, the thing I couldn't tell the students. So on Sunday morning, before my commitment to show up and do the thing as metaphilosophical performance art that night, I at least gave myself a little test scenario where I was like, let me voice this to someone who's not my therapist. I talk about it a lot with my therapist, yes. But this was the first time I named it publicly with a different person who wasn't my therapist. And I was like, okay, well, that was all right. And lo and behold, naturally, our conversation deepened after that. And they were like, oh, this is making a lot more sense now. Thank you for sharing that. Naturally, that's what happens. So I went from my test run with a person and romancing the revolution, this is what that's for, right? To really practice and explore and connect and share and learn the things that we need to do to get more free so that we can show up more freely in the world. We did that on Sunday and I felt really good. I was like, I'm ready to do it publicly. I tried doing it publicly and it did not feel great. But let me say a little bit more about what's going on here too. I'm telling you, we're this feels like I'm in one of my dreams where I'm waking up and still in a dream. I feel like we're still very, very meta. So let me back up and say, because I made the decision to make this gadfly experiment about vulnerability to see if I could really be vulnerable in it, I talked about vulnerability. And I've talked about this before. It's an ongoing thing. Mostly because I'm really curious about it since everything that I did last year, I've heard from so many people, so much of the time, the reaction is oh, you're really putting yourself out there. You're making yourself so vulnerable. You're really being vulnerable and sharing so much of yourself with other people. And it has thrown me because I'm that doesn't feel vulnerable to me. The sharing's not vulnerable, but I do have vulnerabilities. So on Sunday, what I did is I told a little bit of a trajectory of some things that have come up for me lately. As most recently as January. Now, if you remember what was going on in January, I was talking about endings and grieving, some closures. A lot of stuff was stopping. And I may have even described the hallway of doors closing. But I had a conversation with a handful of people one Sunday night that I thought was gonna be like, "I'll pop by for, like, an hour," and then 5.5 hours later, we're all finally starting to, like, get out of there. But that conversation over those 5 hours ended up, going into some prompts of personal questions, and one of the prompts was, "What is something that you need to hear right now?" I have something in my back then, because it was like, all this stuff is ending, I don't know what's gonna happen next, I said, "Something that I need to hear right now is that it'll be okay." Mostly because people will support they'll show up with support for what I'm doing, but if I do what I really wanna do, the way that I really wanna do it, the way that I think it needs to be done, then I actually am concerned that people might feel like I'm losing my mind, or I could be easily dismissed as just, like, too out there. So clearly, you could probably already hear, like, a note of, insecurity, maybe you could say it's lack of self-confidence, maybe this is, like, dependency on validation or being understood by others, like, you could call it whatever you want. But I was like, I would like to hear right now that, like, if I do what I really wanna do, the way that I wanna do it, the way that I think it needs to be done, that I will not be dismissed as being crazy or somehow, like, mentally so unwell that, like, what I have to offer is no longer valid or valuable or meaningful. But instead, I would love for people to be like, "Oh, I think I'm getting this," and be, like, not only interested, but, like, invested in understanding what's happening here. That's the ideal way to be met if you're doing a project. Again, the artists, I think, have to be able to get over that and be like, "Who cares if nobody gets it? I'm doing it anyway." And clearly, I'm not there yet. So in January, I had that conversation, and the people who I was talking to were very lovely, and they were like, "You know what? Honestly, given everything you've done so far, what you're describing doesn't sound that insane. It actually sounds like pretty much on track with where you're going. So that would make a lot of sense to see you go that way," which was encouraging. Well, now back to the vulnerability piece. There were some things that I was like, I could be really vulnerable and talk about like these taboo subjects because it's like funny and comedy and there's like truth issues, as an epistemologist that I could point to be like, that's that's the epistemology of ignorance. To talk about things that we don't talk about might be vulnerable, right? Shame, taboo, that could feel uncomfortable or like very revealing if we discuss things that are otherwise not to be discussed. That's why comedians are great. That's why artists are phenomenal. Like they just say it, right? But even then, while I did do some of that, I noticed that still wasn't the vulnerability piece. That wasn't the thing that was the most vulnerable. That wasn't the thing that I didn't tell the kids about in their class. So here's the real vulnerability. I practiced. I've talked with my therapist about it for a while. I checked myself, then I named it with a person on a call, a new one-on-one conversation. Then I named it in public in a room full of basically strangers. And now I'm going to tell you what it is. Before I tell you my big, big, deep, dark secret of vulnerability, I have to also acknowledge something important that I'm realizing. There's something about like sharing the process of getting free with people, and that can be valuable, but the actual process of doing what Audre Lorde said, being willing to move through being afraid to whatever lies beyond, look at my most vulnerable places and acknowledge the pain I have felt so I can remove the source of that pain. Acknowledging those tender, vulnerable places to remove the source of the pain does not necessarily have to happen in process with people. I get that. So sometimes maybe we don't actually have to do the vulnerable share of like, this is the thing that's bothering me, because to show up really free would mean that we don't even have to talk about it. We're just in it, doing it. It's kind of like the difference would be like if I was like, well, you see, I'm still really insecure about my arm hair, and I'm trying to process that that's like white supremacy informing my self esteem or something like that. That feels so different from just showing up in short sleeve shirts unbothered, which is also still different from naming in front of an audience that a young girl can hear at a distance that that is something that I've done. You see the difference? It's like I'm in the process, I did the process, or now I'm just living and being. So in this particular moment, what I can identify for myself is that I am both simultaneously, well, mostly in the process, because I still haven't named the most vulnerable thing, but in the process of sharing it, I realized, like, okay, this is the clarity. I have not been able to remove the source of pain yet. And so if I tell you the source of pain, that does feel vulnerable in a different kind of way. Do I recommend this for people? No, I'm not saying you should do this. I'm not even sure I should do it. But um this is literally like me processing, like, why is it so weird when people say you're being vulnerable when I feel like I'm not being vulnerable? And do we have to be vulnerable publicly? No. I do not think we need to be vulnerable publicly. There's a reason why it's vulnerable. It's because it can be used against you. Like, it can be your enemy's arsenals. So, no, I'm not recommending that this is what we do, but it's more me like meta processing what's happening when it comes to working through the vulnerabilities, those sources of pain, like Audre Lorde was talking about. If we're sharing our process of it, like Audre Lorde is saying, I had to go through bit by bit, piece by piece, and dismantle that. Maybe that is what allows someone like Audre Lorde to show up in their fullness and their power, using their creative energies as fully as possible. Eventually, yes, I believe that. But these are not all the same thing. I think that's the part I'm gonna now stop over explaining. Okay. So the real vulnerability that I was not able to name for the students that I have named with therapists, that I was naming publicly, and now I'm going to name with you, is that actually I have felt myself be inhibited for many, 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 many years because of something someone wrote on a YouTube video. Oh my God, we're like probably 15 years ago now at this point in time. If you want to look it up, I did actually write about this in 2020. I wrote a blog post that was like the troll that got to me and why I will still write. And so I refer to this person as my troll, unfortunately, or the troll that got to me. This is how they look now in my mind with like anti-cutie stickers. um, and it's wild because people say ridiculous things in comments. We know this. And especially now, they're like mostly bots too. But for someone to go out of their way to leave a comment on someone's video, I'm not even going to try to like understand what's going on there. Especially if it's just like, one to tear somebody down. Unless it's for really, really, really good reason. So maybe this person had a really, really, really good reason to say it. But they didn't even say something so like vicious, in a like, like a racist kind of way or anything like that. What they said felt so deeply personal to me. So here's on this page, when I was like writing this out, the only person who's seen this page is my therapist. And I'm going to actually include this in Romancing the Revolution soon, because I think that right now part of like the Romancing the Revolution is this question of vulnerability and what it takes to get free, to remove those sources of pain, so that we can use our creative energies more fully, more freely. So anyway, this will eventually be shared somewhere, but for now, this is the troll, and with the anti-cutie sticker. I wrote 5 years ago. I wrote about the troll who got to me and said, I will still write, but it is still hard to regularly, really honestly write. So this is always me trying to figure out like how to push through my own bullshit to actually say the things that I really, really, really want to say. I wrote, the featured photo I put on that blog post was of a white man hunched over his laptop wearing dark sunglasses, real incel online menace from a basement kind of vibes. And now this is how the troll looks in my mind, who, by the way, is a real guy somewhere, who made the choice to string together a powerful series of words that obviously hit a sensitive part of me many, many years ago. So the thing about it is that I want my therapist, when I first talked to this about this with her, she was like, have you internalized the voice of that troll? Great question. And apparently, yes, because somewhere that still lives inside of me too. I've given it a home. So I want to figure out if this troll is really my own, or the echo of, say, my parents, who got mad at me for writing about my feelings and told me I shouldn't have those feelings. I also wonder how this troll voice relates to like maybe a voice that I do say lives inside of me, who really wants to speak, but maybe has taken on the character of like, don't say those things out of a protector kind of role. So this is like parts and internal family system stuff. Um, I guess when I wrote this page, I was trying to figure out like, is the troll really some random stranger 15 years ago who wrote a comment on a YouTube video? Or is it a voice that I've internalized and given my home? Or is it a part of me that I have actually now like assumed to protect myself because terrible things could happen if I wrote really honestly and vulnerably? You're probably sitting at the edge of your seat wondering, what in the world could a troll have possibly written that would affect you so deeply for so many years? Well, here's what it said. Something along the lines of, you are undoubtedly the most self-centered and self-indulgent person imaginable. You know, in that vein. I don't know if that's exactly what they wrote. I couldn't care to go find the comment somewhere. But I do know that because I don't know exactly what that person said, over a decade and change, 15 or so years, it doesn't really matter what they said. It matters like the way that this has turned into a monologue that somehow lives in my subconscious. So now the troll could also be screaming things like, oh my God, literally no one cares. You're so insufferable. What makes you so special and important that you have to share whatever it is that you think and feel? Or wow, you're so arrogant, such a narcissist and egomaniac. Get over yourself. It must be nice to have the time and space to only focus on yourself. How selfish and privileged of you to put energy into being so self-absorbed. Like mean things, right? But here's the thing. As I'm working through this, literally right now, you're watching me do it because this is only, the third, fourth time that I'm naming this troll outside of a therapy office, outside of the comfort of my own pages. What I know about that is that that energy, that doubt, that like critic that's like, don't say the thing. How utterly arrogant and self-absorbed of you to assume that anybody cares what you think or feel. That's not valuable. You're not meaningfully contributing to the world. No one needs this. If anything, you're taking up valuable airtime, attention, and space in people's like lives. I could extrapolate and keep going for all the reasons why I have been inhibited to share. And you might be like, that doesn't make sense. Look, you're already going on an hour of a live stream where you're taking up a lot of time and saying a lot of shit all about yourself and your process. And I know. And this is processing the process. And I feel like there's, like the how do you become a metaphilosophical performance artist? I don't know that I'm doing it, but I do know that it feels already significant to give this like space outside of myself. It was really interesting after I named this publicly on a Sunday instead of publicly on the internet. It's like, what if I'm meeting my troll right now face to face? What if they like catch me on YouTube again 15 years later and say, nope, I meant what I said. Same, same. I think I would be very different in the way of handling that now. But after I said this on Sunday, someone came up to me and they're like, I'm a coach and I want to help give you a framework, about like gremlins and inner critics and the ways to rework these internalized beliefs. And that's lovely. I know about gremlins. In fact, let's rewind and let me tell you, here's a newsletter called Love an Artist, and an artist is talking about their meta projects and what happened when they presented it to the audience. One of those meta projects happened to be a gremlin party where the artist befriended her gremlins, drew pictures of them, their little portraits, and taped them up all around the room on the walls and invited friends over to cheers, have a toast, and say, these were the gremlins that were holding me back in these ways, and now look how cute they are. They're part of the party at this point. That's something I did in graduate school. I was not doing internal family systems therapy, and actually, I'm still really not officially. But back then, I think I was already on the path of being like, I can like rework my own relationship to these gremlins. And now that I know who they are, where they show up, what they say, what their like needs are, that kind of stuff. So it was adorable and lovely and so supportive for someone to come up after Sunday to be like, here, I'm a coach. Let me talk about some like this whole framework for how to work through your inner critic voice. Lovely human to human, not exactly what you want at the end of like a stand-up philosophy thing. It was rough. It was a weird environment. I'm going to go back there in a second. But anyway, if you're lost now, Let's find our way back, which is just to say, like, I don't think that you need to be vulnerable. You don't have to share the most vulnerable thing, but the important thing is to go through the process of addressing those tender parts to remove the source of the pain so that it doesn't hold you back any longer. And sometimes telling people the process of how you did that can be helpful. And sometimes the process is also naming it as a way to disempower that troll or the enemy's arsenals. Like to be able to reclaim something that and get move into a place where you're like, actually, this is who I am. Nothing, to quote Audre Lorde again, nothing I accept about myself can be used against me to diminish me. I am who I am, doing what I came to do, acting upon you like a drug or a chisel to remind you of your meanness as I discover you in myself. I'm not trying to do that perfectly, and that's fine, but it is something that I am trying to do. You know what? Literally, I just lost my train of thought now. Where was I going? Shit. Um, hmm. I wanted to think I was something about the person who came up and talked about inner critic. I don't know where it is. I think it's gone. I think it's gone. It left me. Well, all right, that's it then. Let's see. I think that I'm right now tracking to see if I want to read any more about this page. What's happening here on the right-hand side of the page is a little bit more where I describe some of my own writing process, where like I write a lot in my notebooks, and even when I wasn't writing so much anymore online or publishing thoughts online or doing stuff like this, I was still writing a lot in my pages, and I was like, that feels helpful to a degree in terms of journaling and processing, but it's not something that actually gets shared. And so I wrote, let's see, like a security blanket. Yeah, I write anywhere. Messy, scribbled, partial thoughts, boring descriptions of my days, repetitious ideas, big plans. It's upside down and sideways on a page. And when the next page turns, it buries the last. Notebooks pile up in stacks. All my words and thoughts and feelings become a raw, unusable heap, a volume of sedimented process. Typically, diaries are private and meant to stay unread by others, at least until you're dead. But even if you're right, you're doing it wrong. I don't know. That's like the voice that came through. I think what that little chunk of words is naming is that, like, I was still writing, but I'm not in a place of sharing, or I hadn't been for like 10 years. And even though I wrote that blog post of like the troll that got to me and why I will still write, I didn't. I mean, I hadn't worked through it enough yet. I'm still thinking I haven't fully worked through it enough, like fully yet. But when I look back at what I've done in the past couple of years, I mean, like I'm getting much more bold and free with how I'm sharing my thoughts. I will say that, oh, this is good. Don't lose it. Don't lose it. Don't lose it. Don't lose it. Okay. I'm going to finish this, what I'm talking about. I also have reasonable fears, and this is something that I feel a lot of the time. Maybe it wasn't just internalizing a troll's voice, but part of my other reasonable fears for holding back and things that I'm thinking and feeling or writing and not then sharing so openly is that I'm always learning, which is what makes my process feel so meaningful to me. But when you're learning, you're bound to miss something and even get some things wrong. Others know better than me. Is it my place to say anything? That is a true statement. And I think it was like so many videos ago when I was like, I'm going to tell you why I stopped making YouTube videos back in 2013. And I didn't actually loop back around to that. So now, like months later, we're looping back around to that. Part of why I did that was because I was like, I shouldn't be speaking about these issues. Like, I have so much to say. And I honestly still have YouTube videos up that I think frequently, like, should I take that down? I'm sure it was not nuanced. I don't really love that I even spoke on that issue. You know, it was like in my early 20s and uncomfortable trying to figure out how to do philosophy in a way that was like more relevant to what was going on in the world. And I mean, social media has changed so much. Access to sharing your voice has changed dramatically. But I have kept pretty much everything that I've ever done online up. That's a choice. It is a choice. And I mean, I think part of it is like having some humility and maybe room for accountability. I mean, I haven't gone back and watched everything, but I'm sure that I've said things that I could have done differently, or my opinion has changed since then or become a little bit more complex. But like I think that like being able to show growth and learning in process and like our progress being a developmental process really is something important because like so much of what we need right now is for people to really be thinking, really be figuring some things out, but we can't expect people to know it immediately. And when people say that like learning is so uncomfortable, I think it's because we feel uncomfortable like being not yet fully arrived. And we will likely mess up or it's going to be messy and people are going to see us like unrefined. But there's also something about and that's that's life. Can we do anything other than kind of always be in the process and doing our best? We can be accountable for when we mess up, but we don't we should not wait to show up when we're perfect because if we do this well, there will always be more truths, always be more wisdom, always be more learning that will reveal new insights. That's like part of being actually a responsible learner to reinterpret what we thought we knew based on new learning. The those brain connections are going to be forged in new ways and that allows us to have different access to insight and wisdom. So it's really the growth and the learning and the healing that allows for us to keep showing up better. And ideally, it will be different. We will change along the way. And when we look back at what we were doing, we'll be like, oh, yeah, that I was doing what I could do back then with what I had. And now I'm in a different place. So the last thing that I was going to say, this is the little part that I was like, hold on to that. When there's a troll voice speaking up in me, if I feel that of like, you're insufferable, who cares about what you have to say about your own shit all the time? You're so self absorbed, all this stuff. It's like narcissistic and self indulgent, all these things. On one hand, I want to be like, yeah, sometimes we don't need to know everything about a person's inner process. And we don't, truly, we don't. And this can also be true that sometimes even getting access to somebody else's inner process is something that's relatable enough to help people feel like connected and less alienated or encouraged to keep reflecting on themselves in a different kind of way. That's lovely. I think the most important and strategic safeguard that I've put up to like be able to manage this is to always have everything that I'm doing, even if it's not obvious right at the surface, but to have everything I'm doing, again, rooted into some kind of greater intentionality of like, what is the purpose of sharing this? The purpose of sharing isn't to just say, look at me, please give me validation, please tell me that I'm like smart or whatever. Like, that's not what I'm going for. I think that when we're trying to do things for the validation of others, that actually is giving the power over to them. That's not from a place of freedom. That's from a place of need and like that we have some kind of lack. So what really matters, I think, is using our energies fully and creatively in the greater service of a much larger project, like a vision for liberation or the project of helping us all get more free. And that will also include our own process of ourselves getting free. That is hard work. So if we have to dismantle bit by painful bit the things that are still holding us back, then yeah, that's part of the project we need to be doing. Maybe it is important and can be valuable to share that too. So maybe right now I would say my stance is kind of like, I say this, I hear myself say it week after week. It's not learning just for the sake of learning. And it's not sharing just for the sake of sharing. And honestly, I could be really like hard nosed about this and be like, and it's not even critique for the sake of critique. It's not creativity for the sake of creativity. I really think that like if you want to feel strong and purposeful, then literally everything you do can be done from a place of honest alignment in a greater project of getting more free. I'm currently watching the docu-series, The History of Comedy. And I know like I got to the point in, I think I'm like just starting season 2 right now. And I got to this point in the series where like the comedians, they say over and over again, like, yes, there can be political humor, and yes, we can talk about things that matter, and like maybe it changes the way someone thinks, or maybe it changes someone's life. But that's not what we're doing here. And so many times I think this series was like created initially in 2016. Well, that's changed in 10 years. But I couldn't help but notice this like kind of safeguard refrain being uttered over and over and over again by many different comedians, which was that like our job is comedy. Our job is to get the laugh. Yes, we can speak truth and it can be political in nature, but my job is not to change the way people think. It's not to influence an election or to take down a corrupt politician. Maybe it'll happen, but first and foremost, all we're trying to do here is comedy. And that's when artists will say, like, I'm not going to name names, but I think that that is actually like kind of a cop out when artists will be like, I'm just an artist. I'm not here to make a political statement. That's fundamentally not how I think about politics. For the sake of reference, just since I'm talking about it here, I refer to a description of politics by Linda Martine Alcoff, where she says something in an essay called "How is Epistemology Political?" But she says, like, by now it should be clear that when I'm talking about politics, I'm referring to anything having to do with relationships of power and privilege, and whether those relationships are maintained and reproduced or contested and transformed. So anything having to do with relationships of power and privilege, and whether those relationships are maintained and reproduced or contested and transformed. So even if you don't think you're doing something political, it is still political in nature. Either you're preserving the status quo or you're challenging it. And that's what I think about art. That's what I think about comedy. That's what I think about your professional work in whatever industry or vocation you have. That's what I think about the relationships that we hold with ourselves, with our loved ones, with our families, with our friends and community. That's what I think about like our practices, how we choose to spend our time, and the things that we also choose to reflect on and share. So you could be like, wow, that's watertight. You really gave yourself an easy way to be safe here by saying that, like, if I'm sharing, it's not just for the sake of sharing, but if I can find my purposeful alignment in it and do it in a way that is intended to contest and transform relationships of power and privilege, then it may not achieve the overwhelming, like, largest goal of the vision of liberation that I believe we must have and move towards, but it is the tiniest little bit that I can do to make sure that whatever it is I'm sharing is like at least contributing in that, pushing in that direction. And maybe that's a stretch. Maybe I'm wrong. Like this. Even if you're right, you're doing it wrong. Maybe so. Maybe so. And what I do know is that I'm learning in the process. I feel like I'm doing my best as diligently with as much commitment as I can in the meantime to keep checking myself, so much so that even in the past week, literally a week ago, it was me not being able to utter anything about this troll voice to some kids who I am really committed to helping grow them. I want them to learn. I want them to be strong and brilliant as much as they already are, and then some. But I was in a place where I couldn't even name that. And now, if I look at what I've done this past week, I've named it multiple times, even now, putting it on the fucking internet. And who knows how long the internet lives? So I can at least see my own growth. Hopefully, it does contest and transform relationships of power and privilege. I'm operating in a place of a lot of privilege to be able to say this. And it's not even the most, like, derogatory thing. Like, yeah, you've got your own hangups. Work through it. Go to therapy. I agree. I am. I'm trying. Thank you. But I do know that if I am not able to do my work because I have not done my work of dismantling that voice that holds me back, I'm not going to be able to show up as best as I possibly could. I will not be as powerful. I will not be as bold. I will not be as creative. I won't be able to use my own energies as fully and creatively as I want to, as I think we all are responsible to. And if that's our hang up, then it's our responsibility to try to work through it. That's kind of like the thing that I'm going to say here. So I do believe that working through these tender spots, the most vulnerable places, the sources of our pain, and trying to remove them is the work also of becoming more free. So yes, it is in the service of collective liberation because it's helping radicalize us to be more revolutionary. And isn't getting more free part of what it takes to be part of the movement? Anyway, that's a short? That was not short, but that's a summary point of kind of also to say all of that truly is also a reflection of just 4 weeks of what I've learned from Romancing the Revolution. Another radical start of something that nobody really knew what we were getting into, and it's still forming, which I'm okay with naming that. This is the space where I, Cori, am showing up as myself, not as a meta character. I'm showing up as myself, going through the process, processing my process, and really like explaining here's where I'm at right now. This is what's going on. I'm excited about getting into April. Romancing the Revolution, I think, is like a core place where I want to be doing my work. And last week I talked about how pumped I was to have like pages now that can be downloaded and read and shared. Tell me that that does not look like progress from 15 years ago, internalizing the voice from some troll on the internet. Then 10 years ago, being very quiet and only writing in my notebooks. So much as 6 years ago, writing a blog post like, no, I'm gonna write, and then not writing. And then now, like the past 5 years, I would say, has been me working on this. And I will be very honest and say it's been 2 years that I've been in therapy trying to address this so that I can do my work, not just because I'm like, this is really making me sad and, I don't like myself. Like, that's not what this is. I have been trying to diligently address this so that I can do my work, so that I can show up how I want to show up and do what I feel like I need to do. And so to me, I don't know, that's the process, but I feel like that is part of what I'm hoping to also showcase. It would be very different, again, if I were just like, didn't spend an hour and 15 minutes over explaining the process and I just showed you. And maybe there are other places and times and spaces where I am doing that. But to be real, like today was dedicated to talking about the process of how to do it and why. For me, it's all connected back to like my real want of being a meta philosophical performance artist. So this is me, Cori, saying this. I said I'm not doing some meta character. And it's because the meta philosophical performance art is not a character. That's not a pretend project. That's like what I'm trying to do. Okay, so there you have it. Wow, that's an hour and 15 minutes or so. If you're watching this, then and you tracked the meta levels of it all, maybe there's even more than we're aware of. I think it'd be appropriate to end this one now, actually, with my hope and intention. It's looking back at all the things that I've not done or the things that I felt burdened by that have really kept me small. I think it's reasonable. It is necessary to stay humble, to be in a place of humility and know that we can mess up and we can learn and we can grow. And I feel like I want to go in a direction that allows me to not over explain, that I don't care if I'm misunderstood. Um, I mean, I don't care if I'm not understood. If I'm misunderstood, I think I still have some hangups on that because being misunderstood could be dangerous, not just for me, but like I would hate for someone to take something that I'm saying and twist it in a way that is not how it's intended, and use it in like very, very violent or not good ways. I hope that doesn't happen. But and then people say, well, you can't control what people do with what you say. And that's also something wise, I guess. Anyway, I hope that I can do my work in a way that feels more free. I hope that I can continue to show up, whether that's for my pages, whether it's journaling, whether that's in front of an audience, whether that's even on a live right now. I always want to be able to show up in my relationships, in my everyday life, as fully and freely and like at ease as possible so that I can be present for it, have fun with it, create through it, as fully using the creative energies and the presence of that. That's where I'm hoping to go. So I will say right now, on April 1st, 2026, that my project of becoming a meta-philosophical performance artist for sure does involve a lot of vulnerability, and it's more than that. It's more than that. And it's a process. So anyway, that's a lot. Now I'm going to really stop. Thank you for your support. As always, I am so grateful for the people who are along for this ride. I really do hope that it offers something for you in your journey. I can hear the little voice sneaking up. I'm just gonna say, you know what? Do what you want with it. Like, I will show up. I'm gonna end on that Audre Lorde quote again because I think that's gonna be like my buoy out of this, so that I don't get into another deep dive in a rabbit hole. But I am who I am, doing what I came to do, acting upon you like a drug or a chisel to remind you of your meanness as I discover you in myself. And that's the goal here. Thank you, Audre Lorde, always for your wisdom, for your words, for your process, for your practice, for your being. And I hope that that is how we can show up for each other. Yes, I think this is an epistemology of intimacy in the works. Yes, I do think that truth is a relationship. Yes, I do think that we can become more free, and we can help each other in that process too by being who we are meant to be. Become who you are. Okay, all my little phrases are just like whew, swirling all around, but take good care of you, take good care of others, and thank you for the support. See you soon.